If y'all don't mind, we'll have sort of a class format here tonight. If you want to say something, well, that'll be fine. If you don't, well, that's okay too. I want to talk a little bit about a common problem. There's always a difference of opinion among people in the church. Especially disturbing when it involves two Christians. And of course, I think that we all know that we encountered that a little bit here about a month or so ago, and that was disturbing. Wasn't a good thing. And we want to notice this evening some examples of some folks who had some differences in the New Testament. They all involved the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul had differences with at least three different people. And here you would think sometimes, if I've got a problem with Burnell, and I've got a problem with you, and I've got a problem with Michael, well, the problem is probably me. If I've got all those problems, it's probably me. But it's, in this case, it might not be. If you would turn to Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 9, verse 27. You remember the Apostle Paul, before he became the Apostle Paul, he was Saul, and he persecuted the church. Of course, he had an experience on the road to Damascus. He spoke with Christ. Christ spoke with him. And he had a change of heart. He was baptized by Ananias, who appeared to him. And he began to teach and to preach. Was it Ananias, or did I say that wrong? Was it Ananias? I think it was. Well, wasn't it, Billy? Okay. But at any rate, he began to teach and to preach. And apparently he became acquainted with a man named Barnabas. Acts chapter 9 and verse 26. And when Saul was come to Jerusalem, he essayed, he tried to join himself to the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, and believed not that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took Paul, and brought him to the apostles, and declared unto them how he had seen the Lord in the way, and that he had spoken to him, and how he had preached boldly at Damascus in the name of Jesus. And of course, as a side note, in verse 26, someone asked me one time, do you have to be a member of a certain group? Do you need to be identified as a member here at White Park, or could you just, I'm just here and there? And I pointed this out. Paul tried to join himself to the disciples there at Jerusalem. He tried to join the group at Jerusalem, to place his membership, if you would. So to be identified with that group. But apparently Barnabas here, who had become acquainted with this man Saul, befriended him, took him to the group there in Jerusalem, the church there, and told him, look, he's okay. He doesn't persecute the church anymore. In fact, he's preaching the gospel of Christ. Now notice Acts chapter 11. Paul and Barnabas began to teach and to preach, and after this, Barnabas, I think it was, he went down to Antioch, and he established a church in Antioch there. Acts chapter 11, I think it is, verse 25. Let me turn one more page. Barnabas, he's just talking about here, verse 22, he sent forth Barnabas that he should go as far as Antioch. Who, when he came, Barnabas, and saw the grace of God, and was glad, exhorted them all that they with purpose of heart they would cleave unto the Lord. For he, Barnabas, was a good man. He was full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and much people was added to the Lord. And then Barnabas departed to Tarsus, looking for Saul. He going to get the Apostle Paul, or Saul at this time, to come down there to Antioch and to help him to teach and preach there in Antioch of Syria. Now notice verse 29. Acts chapter 11, verse 29. Then the disciples, every man, they're in Antioch. Then the disciples there in Antioch, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt in Judea, or Jerusalem, and the area of Judea, which also they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. Barnabas and Saul are sort of joined at the hip here. They're working together. They put together a contribution here. They're going to deliver it to the church there, the elders of the church there, that they're at Jerusalem. Now notice Acts chapter 12, verse 25. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem. They took this contribution when they had fulfilled their ministry. And notice here, and they took with them, or brought with them, John, whose surname was Mark. John Mark. And I think that turns out to be Mark, who wrote the book, the Epistle of Mark. He's a young man. That's where Peter went to when he got out of prison there in Jerusalem. He went and knocked on the door of I forgot the woman's name, but at any rate, she was John Mark's mother's house. But anyway, on their way back from Jerusalem, they decided they're going to bring John Mark back with them. They're going back to Antioch now. Now notice Acts chapter 13, beginning there in verse 1. They're back at Antioch. Now they were in the church that was at Antioch, certain prophets and teachers as Barnabas and Simeon, that were called Niger, Lucius, and we won't name off, and Saul, the last one there. Notice, verse 2, and they, as they ministered to the Lord and fasted, the Holy Ghost said, separate me Barnabas and Saul for the work whereunto I have called them. When they had fasted and prayed and laid their hands on them, they sent them away. Barnabas and Saul have gone out preaching now. Notice, if you would, verses 4 and 5. So they went. I just sort of put this together this afternoon. I ain't looked at this a whole lot, so y'all bear with me, Billy. You know how it is, Billy. 4 and 5. So they, being sent forth by the Holy Spirit, departed unto Seleucia, and from thence they sailed to Cyprus. And when they were at Salamis, they preached the word of God in the synagogues of the Jews, and they had also John to their minister. John Mark, he's still there with them. But notice verse 13 now. Acts chapter 13 and verse 13. Now when Paul and his company loosed from Paphos, they came to Perga in Pamphylia, and John Mark, departing from them, returned to Jerusalem. John Mark was apparently a young man. Not sure how old he was, but he was a young man, and he had decided, I guess for some reason, he's going to go with Paul and Barnabas on this preaching trip. And he went a little ways with them, but apparently maybe he got homesick. Maybe he missed his girlfriend back at home. I don't know. But he decided he's going back home. He's had enough of this traveling around with these two older men. Now let's go to Acts chapter 15. John Mark had gone back to Jerusalem. Acts chapter 15, beginning in verse 36. Acts 15, verse 36. And some days after, Paul said unto Barnabas, let us go again and visit our brethren in every city, where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they do. But Barnabas decided to take with him John, whose surname was Mark. But Paul thought not good to take him with them, who departed from them from Paphos, Pamphylia, and went not with them to the work. Notice verse 39. The contention was so sharp between Paul and Barnabas that they departed asunder one from the other. Barnabas took Mark and sailed into Cyprus, and Paul chose Silas and departed, being recommended by the brethren unto the grace of God. Paul and Barnabas have had a difference now over this young man, Mark. Paul wasn't impressed when this young man, Mark, left and went back home. And again, was he 18? Was he 25? I don't know. Did he have a right to decide, I don't want to go any further? I would think so. But Paul wasn't impressed by that. But they're fixing to go on another preaching trip, and Barnabas says, well, let's take John Mark again. And Paul said, well, no. He quit us. The other time he quit and he went back home, and we can't sort of not depend on him. Let's don't take him. They got into, it says, a sharp, and the contention was so sharp between them that they departed company. Paul and Barnabas fell out, if you will, over John Mark. Paul not impressed with John Mark. Now him and Barnabas have crossed swords now. What's going to happen? They're never going to speak to one another again. That's how we handle it today, huh? We just don't speak to each other ever again. Michael, you stay on that side, and I'll stay on this side, and we'll be fine. But we can't do that. I've often prayed here in the last several years, thanking the Lord for the peace that we have here, and I sincerely mean that. It hasn't always been so. But we've had peace. And I was much disturbed by the little discussion we had about a month ago here. That wasn't good on neither side. On neither side. That was not impressive. But as a side note here, I understand they've got together and discussed that, and they've solved all that, and everything's okay, and that's good. That of course, is what we need to do. But notice, let's go a little further. Galatians chapter 2. We're going to find that the Apostle Paul here now is going to cross swords, if you will, with the Apostle Peter. Paul can't get along with nobody, I don't guess. You know. Galatians chapter 2. And notice what's going to happen here. Here's another one. Galatians chapter 2, beginning in verse 7, looks like I've got it wrote down there. We have here a discussion of the Apostle Peter. He's the apostle to the circumcision, or to the Jews. Paul is the apostle to the uncircumcised. They've gone to the council, we call it Acts chapter 15, the council in Jerusalem there, to discuss, there have been false teachers come from Jerusalem to Antioch saying, you Gentiles have got to be circumcised in order to be saved. And of course that wasn't true. They went to Jerusalem to discuss that, and they sort of got that ironed out. Peter's the apostle to he teaches the Jews. Paul is teaching the Gentiles. All that's good. Galatians chapter 2, but verse 7, beginning, it said, but contrariwise, when they saw the people at Jerusalem that the gospel of the uncircumcision was committed unto me, Paul, as the gospel of the circumcision was unto Peter, they recognized I was just as much as interested in the Gentiles as Peter was the Jews. Verse 8, for he that wrought effectually in Peter to the apostleship of the circumcision, the same was mighty in me towards the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John, these are apostles there in Jerusalem, who seemed to be pillars, who seemed to know what they were talking about. Cephas, of course, is Peter now, verse 9. When James and Peter and John, who seemed to be pillars there, perceived or understood the grace that was given unto me, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go into the heathen and they unto the circumcision. Now, this is before Paul and Barnabas has fallen out over John Mark. This is after the council in Jerusalem, as we call it today. Notice verse 11 now. Barnabas and Paul are back in Antioch now. Verse 11, it said, but when Peter now, the apostle to the Jews, but when Peter was come to Antioch, where Paul and Barnabas were, a Gentile church, if you will, he's just there visiting, but he's the apostle to the Jews, and that's fine. When Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood Peter to the face because he was to be blamed. What's the matter with Peter? Here we got the apostle Paul and the apostle Peter, they're nose to nose. Notice why, verse 12. For before that, Peter's in Antioch. Before that, when certain people came from James back in Jerusalem, well, the apostle Peter, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when other folks from Jerusalem were come, his Jewish friends, Peter withdrew himself. He separated himself, fearing those that were of the circumcision. He didn't want his Jewish friends to know that he had Gentile friends. He's a Christian. They're Christians. Everybody's Christians. But he didn't want his Jewish friends to know that he was being friendly to Gentile Christians. Verse 13. The other Jews dissembled likewise with him. Notice it insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. Barnabas got caught up in that too. And notice verse 14, and when I saw that they, Peter, Barnabas, and whoever else it was, walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said it to Peter before them all. If you're being a Jew, lives after the manner of Gentiles and not as do the Jews, why compelleth you the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? Why are you one way one time and one way the other? I forgot to ask for a comment. Anyone have any comment?
Yeah, back in chapter 9, how Paul and Barnabas wound up in Tarsus, the apostles at Jerusalem was afraid of them.
Mm-hmm.
and he sent them away to Tarshish. That's Paul's hometown, I
Right.
believe it is.
That's where he was from. Yeah.
And that's how they got in Tarshish. That the brethren, the apostles was really, and he explained to them what all went through that he got to be apostle.
Right.
There, so
Right.
that's how they wound up being in Tarshish
Right.
at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And
you
in
know,
verse 12, I don't try to go over when you sermon.
No, go ahead.
In verse 12, no, verse 13. Anyway, that's when we leave Peter, and he's no more mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles no more. It takes up with Paul and Barnabas and that bunch.
Right.
But it does mention Peter, and I think the last time in the Acts of the Apostles, he's no more mentioned again as I have ever seen or found in the Acts of the Apostles. But
Yes.
he was there.
And that's also true of Barnabas in Acts chapter 15. When Paul and Barnabas fell out, or John Mark, that's the last you hear of Barnabas. In Acts. It was Paul and Silas then.
And Peter almost got put to death there in that chapter 13, I believe it was. King Herod put
James.
him in prison with Silas, I believe. But anyway, they killed Silas.
They killed James.
They killed James, and they would have put Peter to death, but because of the Passover.
Right.
I want to ask a question here. It mentions Easter there in verse chapter 13.
Right.
Does anybody know the difference between Easter and the Passover?
I don't think there is a difference, is it?
Well, I'll tell you the difference.
Okay.
Easter is when the world takes care of hiding Easter bunnies and eating chocolate candy, and the Christians uses only the worst day of the week to take care of the Lord's Supper. So that's the difference. The world takes care of eating the candy and stuff, and we take care of it.
Okay. But as far as the world's
So that's the
concerned in
difference
society
between
today.
Easter and the Passover.
Yeah. But I think that the translation should have been Passover instead of Easter in Acts chapter 13. But at any rate.
He escaped with his life there, Peter did.
Right. Yes, he did.
That's where you said John Mark. He went to John Mark's mother, Mary, so that could be the same John Mark that left him in Perga. I'm just guessing.
Yes, I think it is. I think it is. And you remember the Mark when Jesus was before Pilate, the young man that ran out and he didn't have nothing on but a sheet. That's supposed to be Mark too.
Yeah.
And he was a young person, a young man. I think he wasn't no kid.
Go ahead with that.
Okay. But look, we've got Peter. I mean, the Apostle Paul. He's not real fond of John Mark. Him and Barnabas has fallen out. Him and Peter's gone nose to nose here. He told Peter here, when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel. The Apostle Peter was not walking according to the gospel of Christ, wasn't behaving himself as he should have. He withstood him to the face. But what I want to ask you this evening, Paul has fallen out with these three folks. Did they ever resolve that? Or they never spoke to each other ever again? Or what happened? What happened to them? Notice Mark chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. We'll answer that here in just a minute. Matthew chapter 5. When we have a falling out with someone, what are we supposed to do? Me and Edgar's got a disagreement here. And so I'm going to go directly to Micah and tell Micah about Edgar. No? Yeah, that's what I would do. Is that the right thing to do? No, that's not the right thing to do. Well, what am I supposed to do? I've got a disagreement with Edgar. Go talk to Edgar. Michael, you can't talk to him. You just can't talk to him. I've heard that. And it ain't just Edgar. We just use it to Edgar. Sure, you can talk to Edgar. But we use that as an excuse. You can't talk to him. You can't talk. That's an excuse. Matthew chapter 5, verse 23. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remembers that thy brother hath aught against you, let's put that in terms of our life today. If you come to the church building here and you remember that me and Edgar remember that we've got a difference between us. And I used an example of several months, 2 or 3 years ago. I don't, Michael, you weren't here, but Andy referred to it not too long ago. One time I bought a coon dog from Edgar. He's a big coon hunter. Got good dogs. I decided I want to get on with a coon dog. Bought me a coon dog from Edgar. And that old thing was wore out. He couldn't smell a coon or a cat or nothing. And he was eaten up with heartworms too. He died 6 weeks later. I gave him $400 for that dog. And Edgar knew the old dog was dead anyway, but he sold him to me. And that's not true. But that's the way Edgar will do you. Stay away from Edgar. He'll skin you alive every time he gets you. If that's the case, I should have went back and talked to Edgar. But thankfully that didn't happen. But that's what we fall out over today, is something that's silly. It's been my experience when you go to talk to somebody, it ain't that big of a deal anymore. It didn't matter anymore. Since you're there to talk to them, well, it's okay, it doesn't matter. But we just don't do that. But here, if you come to the church building, you remember, and Edgar's got a difference here. He says, leave your gift, this is verse 24, leave your gift before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. You show up to the church building, you've got a difference with somebody, go out back here and discuss it with him. Michael, you can't stay on that side, and I'm going to stay on this side, and we'll never ever speak again. And our worship is quite acceptable to the Lord. No, that won't work. But folks, as I said minutes ago, a few years ago, we had quite a lot of problems here. And I pointed that out to some of those folks, and I had 3 different ones tell me that didn't apply anymore. And they knew full well that it did. The reason it don't apply anymore is because we don't have an altar. That's silly. That's an excuse. And I can promise you that all 3 of them today, if you ask them about that, they wouldn't know. They would deny that. Yeah, that applies to us today. What's the teaching there? It's not the altar, not the furniture. It's your attitude. It's the teaching there. If you got a difference with someone before you come to a worship service with your brother, get it straightened out. And don't come up here and, you stay on your side and I'll stay on mine, and that's how we'll get along. And the Lord's just tickled to death with both of us. No, He's not. Our attitude should be, we need to get together and sit down and work out these differences. And not offer silly excuses that you can't talk to Edgar. You just, I've never tried to talk to him, but I know you can't talk to him. That's an excuse. And of course, that's no good. Go talk to him. And you'll usually find out that it ain't that big of a deal once you sit down together and talk about those things. But what about Paul and his 3 folks? Now, notice, if you will, did Paul ever patch these things up with Mark and Barnabas and the Apostle Peter? 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 11. 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 11. We have no record of Paul and John Mark ever sitting down and discussing anything. Discussing their differences. But notice what Paul writes here. 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 11. He's writing to Timothy. He says, Timothy, only Luke is with me now. He says, Timothy, take Mark, bring him with you, because he, Mark, is profitable to me in the ministry. John Mark, who once, as a young person, decided to go back home, has matured into a mature Christian now. And Paul says, if you can, bring him with you, because he's very useful, very helpful to me in teaching and preaching here. Had they made up? Apparently they had. He has a whole lot better opinion of him than what he used to have. So apparently they sat down and they patched up their differences. They didn't decide to go their different ways and never speak to one another again. But that's how we get along better. We just don't speak to each other. That's no good. It won't. It will never work. It never worked before. Colossians chapter 4. Colossians chapter 4. Notice this one here in verse 10. This one's sort of hard to understand, but we could have it either way. Aristarchus, Colossians 4 verse 10. Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, salutes you. Writing to the church at Thessalonica. And Marcus, sister's son to Barnabas. The sister's son to Barnabas. I can't get that in my feeble little mind what that is, who that is.
Read again that.
Marcus, sister's son to Barnabas.
Oh.
Is that correct?
Barnabas' sister's son?
Barnabas' sister's son? Okay, well, I figured that out one time, then I thought, well, no, it's his cousin, but they're related somehow. The way it's stated there, I'm not, it sort of confusing me. But notice, touching whom let's see where I'm at. Touching whom you receive commandments, if he come unto you, receive him. I'm still confused a bit. Is he talking about Marcus, or Barnabas, or both? But when they come to you there in Thessalonica, receive him, take him. He's a good person. He's okay. He'll help you, and you can help him. Did they patch those differences up? Apparently, they did. But now notice, let's go to Peter and Paul now. Peter withstood him to the face. They're right here. Paul's telling him, you did the wrong thing. You're to blame. You're not walking according to the gospel. There was other folks there. Apparently, Barnabas also was carried away with that foolishness there. Probably, if I was the Apostle Peter, he told me about that in front of all them folks. Randy, I never spoke to him ever again. That'd be the human thing to do. What about Peter? 2 Peter chapter 3. Did Peter ever get over it? Did he have to swallow his pride and, just say, well, you have to overlook him because he's sort of a hothead? He was involved. He had John Mark. He was mad at him. He was mad at Barnabas. Now he's mad at Peter. Notice verse 15. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. An account that the long-suffering of our Lord is salvation. When the Lord will suffer long, when the Lord is patient with us, it will help to contribute toward our salvation when it ever occurs to me in my little mind that I need to try to do better because the Lord's given me a little more time to straighten up. That's pretty much what he's talking about there. Notice the next verse, though. Even as our beloved brother Paul, also according to the wisdom given unto him, hath written unto you. This is the beloved brother Paul that got right in Peter's face and withstood him to the face and told him, you're wrong. You're not walking according to the gospel of Christ. One of the saddest things that I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of it, is when two preachers gets at odds. I've seen preachers get it different from, one's jealous of the other, and usually what it is. And I've seen one preacher run another preacher down till it was awful. Just jealousy, and that's hard to overlook. And I've asked one preacher, did you talk? And his reply was, well, you can't talk to him. Brother Kay, you can't talk to him. That's wrong, even for a preacher. and a man that's preached for all of his life, a noted preacher. But yeah, you can talk to him. But notice the Apostle Peter and the Apostle Paul apparently patched up their differences too. Our beloved brother Paul, the one who had withstood him to the face, and apparently admitted maybe, well, yeah, you're right, I was wrong. You know, I've been wrong so many times, Burnell, it's just sort of easy to say I was wrong. Ain't no big deal no more. You know, I usually am wrong, but you know. But the things that have happened in the past, we need to overlook those things and move on. You know, the Apostle Paul persecuted the church. The Apostle Paul murdered Christians, took part in it, maybe had a physical hand in murdering Christians. How did he ever get over that? How did people ever forgive him for that? I mean, they had to, needed to. It was a hard thing to do. You know, I'm sure it was hard for those folks at the church at Jerusalem to accept him, knowing what he had done. I'd have probably been just like them. But we have to get over these things that are problems for us today. Thankfully, murder has never been involved in any of our differences. Nobody's ever been killed over some of our differences. But, you know, but by the way some folks act, it was sort of like actual murder. You think somebody got killed over that, when it actually wasn't that big of a deal. And I'm looking for my last verse here. See. So it's chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3. Verse 13. Paul writing to the church at Philippi said, "Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but here's one thing that I do. I forget about the things that are in the past. And I go back and fix anything that's in the past. I can go and apologize for whatever I've done, try to make it right for whatever I've done, do all that I can do to make it right for whatever I've done." You know, Romans chapter 12 and verse 18, this one just occurred to me. Romans chapter 12 and verse 18, "If it be possible, as much as lies within you, live peaceably with all men." Do everything that you could possibly do. If you have to bend over backwards to live peaceably with somebody, do that. Try. It may not work. Edgar might be trying to live with me peaceably, and I'm not going to have it because of that old dog he sold me. But that's my fault. That's not Edgar's fault. Edgar's trying to make it right, and I ain't going to have it. I'm going to still remember what Edgar did to me 20 years ago. But it is incumbent upon every one of us to make the effort to make things right. Doesn't matter what the other person does. It's my business, it's my job to go to that person and try to make it right myself. Whatever he does or she accepts it or doesn't, that's up to them. But I have the responsibility of trying to make it right. Let's think about those things. I went further than Did anyone have any comments since I'm through talking?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
You were talking about kinfolks there. Paul had a sister in Rome.
Yes.
In Rome, because you go to 23rd chapter of Acts, it says Paul's sister's son there.
Yes.
So he had a sister living in Rome.
Right.
At that time.
Right.
And that's all the members, all the families I know Paul had a mention of. That's the only place.
Right. They were in Jerusalem. Yeah, Paul was in prison in Jerusalem, and the nephew went and told the guard that there's some people waiting to kill him. That's the reason they took him to Damascus. But yeah.
He overheard the guards talking about how the thieves and them was going to kill old Paul.
Right.
And he went and told the higher ups there.
Right. They transferred him in the middle of the night or something like that. But yeah. Yeah. But at any rate, just something that we can think about. It's not difficult to say I was wrong. Not difficult at all. For some folks, apparently it is. But it's not hard to say that I was wrong, and usually it ain't that big of a deal to begin with. Just think about those things. I want peace. I want tranquility. I want to support what's right. for the gospel of Christ, but us working together and promoting that, I'm sure that we will be doing that. Peacefully, we can work together, and we can be a stronger group. If you're subject to an invitation this evening in any way, if you need the prayers of the church, if you have problems that you know for us to pray for you with or about, we'd be glad to do that. Remember our sick folks, Brenda in the hospital, Brenda at home, Brenda Jean at home. She's pretty sick. She don't need that illness that she has, but pray for Brenda, pray for both Brendas. So thank you for your attention this evening. If you're subject to the invitation, won't you come as we sing that song? Okay.